Well, thank you very much. And those of you know me, I am a natural disaster half the time. So it's a pleasure to be up here. I have some wonderful folks that let them get settled. I have Brigadier General Kurt Ryan, who worked with me on Operation Demayan. And Kurt did yeoman's work in the logistics world. Then, okay, and I have Ms. Van Slate with USAID. She works up at PACOM. And also then we have, they rearranged Mr. Colvin from the Pacific Disaster Center. And then we have Mr. McCreery from NOAA and Mr. McNulty from the Team Rubicon, and of course then Dr. Pamela Milligan from the Center of Excellence for Disaster Relief and Assistance. Just to start off, for me, it was a Friday 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, about 11 o'clock, and I get an email from General Brooks saying, you got to come over and take over and work with the JTF in the Pacific. And I said, well, sir, I am a reservist. I have a civilian job, so I need to kind of let my civilian bosses know, probably tell my wife, can I have a week? No. Be on the plane Tuesday, Monday. So Sunday I emailed my bosses, one of them's in the room, and I said, I got to go. And my wife, being a good person, knew what was going on and says go. And we thought we were going to be there for several months. But by the time we got there, General Paul Kennedy of the United States Marine Corps, part of 3MEF, did a great job, and the Marines were on the ground working. We had Army Special Operations Forces elements on the ground, and they were contributing, and of course the Air Force and the Navy. So one thing, even though we're here for land forces, I cannot ignore the support that we get from the Air Force and the Navy and the commercial fleets, because without them, it's going to be hard for us to get anywhere. So kudos. Some of the things I want to just highlight, and then we'll get into the more discussions. They talked about the tyranny of distance as time zones. When we start doing, as many of you know, in operations in multiple time zones, it can be very confusing. And it was really tough for us because when PACOM would give us a timeline to do something, sometimes it was confusing because our timeline was way ahead of theirs. It's already tomorrow there. The other thing what I'd like to highlight is the multinational coordination. Even though this is sort of a Army Land Forces eccentric meeting, the Multinational Coordination Center that we had 16 nations. They did yeoman's work. Within the first couple of days, the countries gathered together, working with the Philippine host nation, and they came up with ways to support and help the Philippine government. The other thing was the interagency, or the whole of government approach. We were working for USAID. Even though we were there as the military and supporting everything, USAID was our customer, and the U.S. Embassy. But you saw the whole of government from many other nations and many other countries, and it was really, I was impressed, and I think we can, Kurt may talk about it. I was really impressed with how well the other nations pitched in. There was no squabbling, no fighting. Everybody had their sector, their turf, and we moved forward. One of the things that we look at is the capabilities. It was mentioned before, I think General Matthews talked about it, is overwhelming the host nation, because we can show up with everything we have and overwhelm a host nation. Some countries are sophisticated enough that they can accept it and back off. Other countries may not be able to handle what we offer without having to digest everything in a matter of time. So one of the things that we have to be careful about is when we move in, that we're not just flooding them with too much information, too much capability. A lot of times, actually, you're wasting resources when you do that. Also, I used to call them targets, but PACOM called them the audience, but there are many audiences in messaging. And one of the things that John Whistler did, I thought was really good, was he was savvy in knowing when to send messages out. one of the things we wanted to do was allow the host nation, it was their country, to allow the host nation to send the message out on their own terms. And there was one instance where the George Washington aircraft carrier was about to depart, and we were getting questions from PACOM and other U.S. organizations about when were we going to announce their departure. And General Whistler decided that it was best if we did a bilateral dialogue, but let the host nation announce it first. And they did, and it went well. And they explained that the George Washington was helpful, but we were bringing in other ships that were better suited to support the littoral operations than the aircraft carrier. So messaging, one thing as you put out is you don't want to get ahead of the host nation. You don't want to get ahead of others, whether it be the State Department or the military. So a lot of times we want to say things because it's good news, but we might jump the gun and not allow other people to share that news. Or even worse, we may say something and you misuse one word, and then the second communique comes out with a different word, and now the world is confused. What do you mean? And as we all know, words are important. They do mean things. And in many cultures and many interpretations, it could really cause a problem that we don't have the resources or even want to waste the time to deal with. The other thing is transition. As soon as we got there, we saw things developing daily. I mean, within 24 hours, one day you see several thousand people, refugees at Tacloban trying to get to Manila. And within a week, we were actually seeing people coming back to Tacloban from Manila with goods from Home Depot or whatever to help rebuild there. So you started seeing the regression. So at that time, we realized there's a transition plan that we have to plan for and execute. Not that we want to leave, but eventually we let the host nation take care of itself, as well as all the NGOs, international organizations, and the non-governmental organizations that are there developing, because there's a point in time where we as U.S. forces were not needed. Some of the things that we all know about in disaster relief, but I just want to highlight, is articulating the needs. A lot of times, a host nation, or even in the United States, Katrina, Andrew, Hurricane Andrew, I attended both, people will ask for things. We need medical help. Well, what kind? There's all kinds of medical help. What do you need? And you may have surgeons and nurses and all kinds of specialists ready and handy, but if you have a brain trauma and you've got somebody that deals with orthopedics, it may not work. Well, you have to articulate the needs, and that's very hard, and that's where the assessment teams come in, and we do a lot of that. But before you just rush people in, you want to know about that. Also, it's a very complex situation. We were dealing with an insurgency in the Philippines. Fortunately, they called a ceasefire, and so you worry about your own security, but you also make sure that they're not stealing or trying to rob your goods. Let's say we saw this in the Balkans, where mafia-type organized crime would steal and pilfer medical supplies that we were trying to get to local villages. And that was an eye-opener when I found out that, yeah, we have a ceasefire. And I'm like, what do you mean? With all that said, it starts off at phase 0. Relationship building. Those among us here are building a relationship, because you don't want to, as the expression is, you don't want to hand out business cards on the battlefield. Well, during the disaster, that's the last place you need to start. Who are you? What do you do? And it goes from there. It goes to the various nations. It goes to the capabilities of those nations, understanding our own capabilities to include the Air Force, the Navy, and other nations such as Australia, Japan. Japan did tremendous work while in the Philippines, and understanding what they bring, to the table as well. And that way we have all the stakeholders involved. And this is not easy. Phase 0 and phase 1, it's going to take time. None of this is done overnight. And finally, I would offer that even though we would talk about Operation Damayan and working in the Philippines, and the Marines did a fantastic job, the next disaster could be in a landlocked area, perhaps Nepal, Kathmandu. And the requirements and the capabilities will be totally different from that of a island nation that has littoral support. Many other neighbors, like India, would be involved, but those are the kind of things we have to look at. So the next time, we may have a U.S. Army heavy influence with the Marines supporting us, of course with the Navy and the Air Force. So we just don't know. Well, with that said, I would like to pass on and allow, who's next? Who's taking this next? Our gentleman from the NOAA Weather Center is going to set the stage on how we look out ahead of time and predict the unpredictable. Thank you.
Well, thank you, General Beard. I'm Chip McCreery. I'm the director of the Pacific Tsunami Warning Center located right here in Hawaii out in Neva Beach. And our office represents only one type of natural disaster, along with the other kinds of things you might need to respond to, like typhoons and floods and earthquakes. And most tsunamis, like the ones we had last week, are just local tsunamis. They affect a local coastline and are usually well handled by the local government. But occasionally we do have these huge events like the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami that I'm sure you're all aware of, and then just a few years ago, the 2011 tsunami in Japan, that are really huge, major disasters that require sometimes an international response that you might be involved in. So our center actually is, we're responsible for issuing tsunami warning information to most of the countries around the Pacific and in the Pacific interior, as well as the countries in the Caribbean. And tsunami early warning, of course, is a very important component. We don't know when any tsunami might happen. We could have a big tsunami today. It could be another 40 years before we have another great tsunami. We just don't know. But when they happen, we need to respond. And we carry out our international mission under the UNESCO's Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission's tsunami programs, and they operate 4 systems, one for the Pacific, one for the Indian Ocean, one for the Caribbean, and one for the Northeast Atlantic and Mediterranean. And through that program, we coordinate everything with the other countries in those areas. We can't even protect U.S. coasts without help from other countries. Our first indication that there might be a tsunami comes from the seismic waves, and those are detected by seismometers that are located in other countries, and that data is contributed freely to help support this system. So that data comes into us, and within a couple of minutes, typically, of any large earthquake anywhere in the world, our center is notified by the arrival of those seismic waves. And similarly, out in the ocean, we can't monitor a tsunami without getting the data from the other countries that are closer to the tsunami than we are. And so it just emphasizes that for natural disasters, really all countries are a part of helping with those things. So I guess just to make the point that the system operates in a holistic fashion, and through these programs of the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission, there's really several aspects to the program besides early warning. The first really is the study of the tsunami risk assessment to any particular country. Every ocean in the world is vulnerable to tsunamis, and we know where the major seismic zones around the world are that could cause tsunamis. So studies are done of what types of event a country might face and what their vulnerabilities are along their coast, so that they can assess things like determining evacuation zones and how to alert the public. And alerting the public really is one of the more difficult tasks because most tsunami damages and deaths occur very close to the earthquake where there's very little time to deal with. And so from what we do as a center, getting a message out within 5 or 10 minutes that there's been a big earthquake and the possibility of tsunami, that information has to flow all the way to all the people at risk along the coast, and that's a big challenge. And of course, the other aspect here is the resiliency of the communities. Communities are going to be hit by tsunamis. You can't really protect against tsunamis. You can try to protect yourself like Japan did by building huge seawalls, but we saw in 2011 that that tsunami breached all those seawalls anyway. So, and for most places can't afford such huge earthworks to do that kind of protection. And so they can do other things, though. You can locate critical facilities, police departments, fire departments, hospitals, homes for the elderly, locate those things out of zones where you may expect a tsunami to occur, and then that will help your community to be more resilient. So with that overview about my particular natural hazard, I'll turn the floor over to Peter Colvin from the Pacific Disaster Center.
Thank you, Chip. Good morning. I'm Peter Colvin. I'm with the Pacific Disaster Center, and I'm the PDC's Director of Humanitarian Assistance and Human Security Programs. And I am kind of standing in for our Deputy Executive Director, who's under the weather today. But actually, my participation is somewhat apropos, given the theme of the panel. I want to extend on what Chip has said about information and providing information to people who need it in time to deal with the disaster. We have kind of some truisms within the disaster response community. One of them is that a disaster is not a natural phenomenon. A disaster is an intersection between natural hazards, or they could be human-induced hazards, and the institutions, the infrastructure, the people that are affected by them. So the ability to keep those people aware and knowledgeable about the risks associated with these hazards is a big aspect of what the PDC has tried to do over its existence. It's started in '94. This means that we work with preeminent organizations like the Pacific Tsunami Warning Center, USGS, others who are very good at understanding the hazards, the behavior of the hazards, and the history of the hazards. But what we are also trying to do is we're trying to make sure that information is readily available and easily consumable by operational decision makers, people who have to make decisions in their personal lives about how you deal with disasters, and trying to understand disasters not as a specific event, but kind of the before, during, and after to those events. And this is where the intersection of a phase 0 kind of activity and the way in which, I guess the way to put this would be to develop indigenous information capabilities within regions. And this would be information, not only consuming information that is provided by NOAA and USGS or their local institutions, but also getting and using information that's provided by communities. So we're really trying to take information sharing down to a community level. So I think what you're going to hear a lot about today is the way in which the DoD works to support disaster response. But disasters originate with the indigenous communities, and they end up with the indigenous communities when the disaster event is over. And so what we are trying to do with some of our tools and some of our network development and some of our methodologies is to promote that kind of information sharing. We have capabilities that are readily available to the DoD, to other U.S. government organizations, and to international organizations such as ASEAN and nations in Southeast Asia that provide a structured way of understanding the information that CHIP provides, for instance, or USGS provides, and doing this in a very timely and rapid way. We are also doing analyses and assessments through the combatant commats. We work with PACOM, but we're also working with the Southcom and others to, again, understand kind of the risk topography out there, what regions are at risk, from what hazards, and why. And quite often we talk about situational awareness, understanding conditions as they're occurring, but we're also trying to promote option awareness. So before the fact, there'll be more knowledge about what you might be able to do if certain conditions come to pass. And again, it requires an environment in which a decision maker, someone leading an organization that has to make decisions, can get knowledge very efficiently, very effectively, in a timely fashion, so they can make these decisions or select these options. And that is really, I think, a real strong focus of what we do. We're funded by OSD policy. We are part of the University of Hawaii. Our offices, our headquarters are on Maui. I'm located at Fort Shafter. We have a small office there that supports PACOM. And really the focus and I guess the genesis of our existence comes about because we believe that information is a very effective tool in dealing with disasters. But that disaster response requires activities before disasters occur. And I think you're going to hear this as a common thread through all our presentations. And with that, I am going to pass it. Who am I going to pass it to? General Ryan? Or General Ryan?
Okay, great. Good morning. My name is Kurt Ryan, and I command a Expeditionary Sustainment Command out of Joint Base Lewis McChord, a relatively new command to the Pacific. And I'd like to first start by thanking the association and General Sullivan for providing this venue for us to talk about a very important topic, and that being the military's response to humanitarian assistance and disaster relief when called. I also want to put a shout out and a personal commending to Lieutenant General Whistler and the entire JTF 505 team, really for the great rescue and relief support they provided to the suffering people of the Philippines following the devastating typhoon in early November of 2013. He really demonstrated a team of teams approach to solving a very complex and wicked problem, that being the scope and magnitude of the typhoon that struck the islands in early November. So without their team, we would not have learned what I would like to share over the next couple minutes, and that's how does the military response provide support to humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. I returned from the Philippines in early December following disestablishment of the JTF headquarters and reflected on this problem set called humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. And I recognized that my own personal knowledge of and my organization's understanding of support to humanitarian assistance was very thin. So I committed to trying to find the right opportunities to train our team and improve us in this capability. Because I recognize that it's not a question of if, but it's a question of when the next disaster's gonna hit somewhere in the world, either to the homeland, somewhere in the Pacific, or somewhere else in the world, and we gotta be prepared to respond to those threats. So today, through a very myopic lens, I'll share with you through my 3 experiences in support of disaster operations, what I think are common threads to disaster operations from a military perspective. Had an opportunity to support the suffering people of New Orleans in 2005 during Operation, following the Katrina hurricane on our southeast coast. Really a disc operation, but very similar threads to humanitarian assistance, disaster relief. And then into November 13, an opportunity to plug into JTF 505 for Operation Damian and the typhoon in the Philippines. And then most recently, just redeployed from Alaska several days ago, where in an exercise, I had a great opportunity to plug into the JTF Alaska in support of an exercise earthquake of a 9.2 magnitude that struck the southern portion of Alaska and created a pretty significant disaster that required military response. I know General Shields is in the audience, and he will also talk about some of this in his presentation in the following days. So Alaska Shield is a part of my frame of reference when I talk about these common threads. First, how do we prepare for HADR? How do military units prepare for HADR? And I think it's a focus on investment. It's investment in leader development. It's investment in ability to rapidly force project our force to the environment. And it's really a change in mindset about how we look at our military mission sets. And then secondly, once deployed, once committed as a military force in support of either another nation or in support of one of our states, what key lessons did I capture that are really common to both DISCA and foreign humanitarian assistance? And that's first an understanding of the importance of relationships, as General Beard talked about, and an understanding of our assigned roles and missions and our contributions to other lead agencies. Also an importance of building solid assessments, both initial and continuous, as we work through the problem. And then how do we build shared understanding? Shared understanding through common operating pictures to not only to maybe gain unity of effort where we often can't gain unity of command. So I'll start off with those key lessons. First, the importance of continued investment, our investment in our fellow friends out there, other nations, our investment in Army relationships with the Joint Force, our investment in relationships with the interagency and international organizations that we will quickly and in an emergency find ourselves working with side by side to solve the same problem. But it takes investment of our time, it takes investment of our talent, it takes investment of plugging into and participating in key HADR exercises. It takes investment in building partnerships, and it takes investment in providing our subject matter experts in exchanges so that we can understand this environment. Really the whole of government, whole of international community approach. And then secondly, it's an investment in our leaders. It's exposing our leaders to the hater environment through growth, growing agile and adaptive leaders who can think, have critical reasoning and are critical thinkers to solve complex problems, and an immersion in culture that we may not have immersed ourselves throughout the world in the last 10 or 12 years. And then most importantly, studying and exercising in this environment called humanitarian assistance, disaster relief, just one segment of the range of military operations that are required to operate if called. And then lastly, the importance of our formations to be able to rapidly force project. And I know we're all working on that really hard as an Army, but it's force projecting different types of capabilities. First and foremost, to be able to build C2 capabilities that are tailorable and scalable to get to a disaster area very responsively and very rapidly, to look at how we pre-position sets and what's in those sets, where are those sets located, and are they accessible to a HADR type environment. And then when deployed and when committing a military force, that we only deploy the minimum force necessary to accomplish the mission, to reduce our footprint either in a foreign support effort or even in a state effort in support of civil authorities, that we don't overwhelm those that we're going to support. Because either the host nation or the state has to be able to absorb that into their footprint, and it can be a problem if they're unable to absorb. So how do we, how does the host nation want to employ our forces? We have to ask that question because they remain in charge, and then how do we partner at every level while deployed? So there truly is a unity of effort, and there is somewhat a unity of command from squad to JTF. And I think Damian proved a good operation that showed from the young Marine at Tacloban and Ormoc and Gayan and other forward bases, their ability to partner with Filipino forces to accomplish the same end state, which is support to the Filipinos in time of need. And then I'll flip it over to Alaska Shield real quick because of my observations there in the last 10 days. In a DISCA environment, General Shields' ability to use, General Shields and General Handy's ability to use Alaska-based forces first because they're there and they're responsive, and leveraging his immediate response authorities to be able to get out into those disaster areas very, very rapidly until other authorities by the Secretary of Defense are approved. So the employment and the rapidly standing up at JTF Alaska to oversee Title X forces in state, both air, ground, and potential sea forces, leveraging the Coast Guard's rapid responsibilities to the homeland along the coast that may be affected by a tsunami following an earthquake, and then absolutely leveraging first responders to the first responders, the Title 32 forces that are already in the state that have authorities to respond very quickly, both air and ground. And then following will be additional requests, typically by the governor to the DoD, asking for additional military capabilities to fill gaps that they may not be able to fill with their own state capabilities. So I'll transition to the second part, understanding, and I'd like to start with first, following a disaster, it's very, very important that we understand the mandate or understand the mission that we've been assigned as a military force. And in Damian, I believe it was to save lives, to search and rescue, and to provide evacuation. And we stayed very focused on that mission set. In Alaska, it was very understood that our mission was to save lives, reduce suffering, and protect critical infrastructure for the state so we can maintain that critical infrastructure and not deteriorate more after the disaster. So understand our mission, and then understanding the relationships that we have with those that we support. It's really a supporting to supported relationship that we bring. It could be a supporting to supported country team, chief of mission, or the ambassador, supporting to the Department of State, to USAID, OFTA, and supporting to the host nation that we've come to help at their request. And then in the DISCA environment, it's a supporting relationship to the governor and to later the dual status commander, if designated, and FEMA as a lead agency for support. And then lastly, the importance of assessments. I learned this during Damian. General Whistler was a master at building a cell led by a one-star general that became the assessment teams to quickly analyze how we were doing in support of the host nation, how we were doing in support of USAID's missions to deliver supplies to those in need. And quite frankly, not only his initial assessment, which drove the required capabilities to deploy, in this case from Okinawa, but from all over the PACOM AOR, to include the 3rd MEB, the 3rd MEF as a JTF, the CTF-70 battle, help me out, the carrier battle group, followed by later CTF-76, which brought an ARGMU to the disaster zone, and also CTF-73, another naval task force in the area. The Air Force's ability to rapidly provide airlift support, and the Marines' self-deployment capability of the 36 MAGTF to be able to provide emergency lift support, very critical to rescue and relief operations early. And then the Army's contribution through the Joint Logistics Control Element and feeds from 8th Theater Sustainment Command, USARPAC, and I-Corps to help fill out JMDs and provide some log support to the operation. So assessments became critical, both initial and then continuous, to ensure that we linked back to our mission statement. And we had to measure the effects of our capabilities that are unique initially to the mission. And our mission, again, was to save lives, search and rescue, and evacuation in Damian, and save lives, reduce suffering, and protect critical infrastructure in Alaska in an exercise. So the assessments team tried to help find the sweet spot. The sweet spot that would say the U.S. military effort has achieved its desired effects, and that the host nation, linked to that completion of the desired effect, then says we no longer require your assistance, which then starts the process of no more unique military capability required to assist, and the start of a recommendation for disestablishment of a JTF and the redeployment of forces out of theater. So that assessment cell, which he stood up as a J9, became key critical to be able to see ourselves and see the disaster and then know when we could unplug that support, because we had accomplished our mission. And we had done that, I think, from 23 days following landfall of the typhoon. And then lastly, just the importance of coordination centers. Coordination centers in the Philippines, coordination centers in a FEMA environment to support of civil authorities really become important to share information, see ourselves and see the disaster, and then apply the right resources to where they're needed. So in Damian, in the Philippines, it was a multinational coordination cell or center. 18 nations came to that center, established by the Filipino government to help synchronize all the contributing nations' military capabilities coming to support. And the support was big. As I said, 18 nations. The AFP is the one who established that coordination center, and through some coaching and our own participation in the coordination center, we were able to transition boards, bureaus, center cells, and work groups quickly to the Filipino Army to manage the disaster. And then in the environment in Diska in Alaska, it was initially immediate response and support to the state EOC, later transferred to the Joint Field Office, downtown Anchorage, where all the participating contributions to the disaster were able to share and assess and apply resources to the right places that are needed. And that can be done through different types of common operating pictures. In the Humanitarian Assistance Disaster Relief in the Philippines, they use a program or a web-based program called APAN. In Alaska, they leveraged technology called Web EOC and a Homeland Security Info Network and a COP called utilizing Google Earth to help us see ourselves and understand the magnitude of the problem and response. So I want to share that. In that COP, it's important that we all operate in an unclassified environment, because that's the only way we can share information amongst ourselves. And both in Damian and in Alaska, we quickly reverted back to and made our main information systems on the unclassified side. So subject to any questions at the end of the panel, that's all I have to offer from a military response perspective. Thank you.
And I think now USAID.
Hello, everybody. My name is Rene Van Slate. I'm so happy to see some people that I already know in the audience, people who've already have worked with. How many people, can you raise your hand, how many people have worked in a foreign country during a disaster response anywhere in the world? Wow. I must say, this is a very, what I always say is, this is a very dangerous audience. And I mean that because I know they're all military professionals, but in my job as your humanitarian assistance advisor from the U.S. Agency for International Development, Office of U.S. Foreign Disaster Assistance, I'm seeing in front of me logisticians, communication specialists, civil affairs, shout out to my civil affairs folks inside there, planners. In short, I have capable, strong, experienced doers, which is the most dangerous audience for us to have. So let's, my role here today is just to give you a couple sentences about USAID's role during foreign disaster response. As you can see here on the panel, and we have some more folks yet to speak, this is an extremely, I want to say it's unsimplified or very complex event, and it's a disaster response in a foreign country. It's not easy. It's not just about logistics, for example. Sorry, all my loggies out there, right? It's very political. It's incredibly nuanced. There are lots of different players out there. So for all of us doers, and I count myself in that category as well, we want to react and we want to assist. It comes from a really good place. So what I offer you here at Pacific Command and beyond is that as your advisor, I represent USAID's Office of Foreign Disaster Assistance. We are the U.S. government's lead federal agency, or LFA, for disasters in foreign countries. This is a big if requested by the host nation. There are lots of countries in this AOR who have disasters all the time and have incredible capacity, right? And we respect that. But if requested, if they will accept our assistance, we are the lead. What we do on the ground in Washington, out here in the command, we validate and prioritize those humanitarian requirements after assessments with the host nation and the international humanitarian community. And then my job in the field, or here or in Washington, is to validate and prioritize requests for U.S. military unique assistance during disaster responses in foreign countries. And we do that through sitting here in lots of meetings during disaster responses here if you're at a combat command, but then also in the field. We have CivMil officers who use what we call the mission tasking matrix. It's just a short spreadsheet which gives those validated and prioritized requests just for U.S. military alone. So I'm going to stop. I know you're surprised that I'd stop talking. But so my clarion call to all of you doers in the audience, if you're interested in this, and don't worry, we will work together in the future in this AOR. It's not a question, as my colleagues have said, it's not a question of if, it's just a question of when. So it behooves all of us, if you are looking to respond, make sure you are certified by USAID with our Joint Humanitarian Operations course. You can contact me to get the information. The Center for Excellence has 2 courses as well. They have their HEART course, which Dr. Milligan will outline as well as their HELP course. There are resources here in this AOR to help you. And for all the beautiful people sitting with the placards in front of your name, I'd love to come to your office and give you a capstone brief about your authorities, our capabilities, how we work together best and best practices, which, thank you, General Ryan, you did a fabulous job. He hit on many of them with his direct experience, domestic response as well as international. Fantastic. So it's up to all of us, and you need to educate us, your civilian brethren and sistren, right? We need to understand our authorities. What can we do? What are our capabilities? What does USAID bring? What do you bring? And then together, I'm looking at you to create flexible and scalable teams that can assist your civilian leads. That's my call to you today. Now, thank you very much.
Thank you. Next is Mr. William McNulty of Team Rubicon. And when we were in the Philippines, we worked with Team Rubicon a lot. They're all veterans and volunteers that come in and do great work. So, Mr. McNulty.
Thank you, General. My name again is William, and I co-founded Team Rubicon with my partner, Jake Wood. We're both former U.S. Marines, or I guess Marines, as the General says. There's no such thing as a former Marine, General Amos. And that happened about 4 years ago. So we're a very young organization. We were founded in the aftermath of the Haiti earthquake. And what we do is we take the skills and experiences of military veterans and repurpose those skills for disaster response. And what we found is that natural disasters are eerily similar to combat zones. Limited resources, the unfamiliar sights, sounds, and smells, the unstable populations that we have to deal with. Our volunteers have over a decade of experience in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, and they have this willingness to serve, and they want to continue to serve when they take off the military uniform. And so we give them those opportunities to continue to serve through natural disasters. Our teams do everything from search and rescue and medical triage, more on the international side, to on the domestic end, doing expedient home repair, debris clearing, and damage assessments. We also do assessments on the international side as well, infrastructure assessments. So that's a brief rundown of what the mission of Team Rubicon is. What we found is you have these, at least in the United States alone, there are 2.8 million veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan. 2.8 million who have come home, served there, taken off the uniform. There was a civic enterprises study that was done, commissioned by the Joint Chiefs in 2009, that asked these veterans, when you take off the military uniform, do you want to continue to serve? And 92% of them said yes. And the top two responses that they gave were helping their fellow veterans, and number two, disaster response. So there's some good work, study, metrics behind what the work that we're trying to do, utilizing veterans through disaster response. But if we think more broadly, open up the aperture a little, we fought with 50 countries in Iraq and Afghanistan. So that's 50 countries that sent troops to those two theaters of war. And their veterans have that same sense of purpose to want to continue to serve. And so what I'm doing right now is working with a business design firm called IDEO in developing and taking this model that we've developed here in the United States and replicating it in those countries that we fought with in Iraq and Afghanistan. So consider fully autonomous Team Rubicon Australia, Team Rubicon Canada, Team Rubicon United Kingdom, run by Australian military veterans, run by Canadian military veterans, run by British military veterans, run by Filipino military veterans. And so that's what we're looking at doing moving forward. That will be really fully launched in 2015. And then just to wrap up, before I pass over to Dr. Milligan, our last international response was Typhoon Haiyan, as the general said. We deployed 86 individuals to Typhoon Haiyan, and there we deployed a disaster medical assistance team. We deployed assessment teams in Tacloban and Tolosa, so in those outlying areas that were hit by the typhoon. We will continue to work. We learned a lot of things. We made mistakes, learned a lot of things about what we need to do during Typhoon Haiyan. And so I'm really looking forward to meeting a lot of you, especially some of our foreign partners here, and how we can engage your veterans on international missions moving forward. So pass it off to Dr. Milligan.
Thank you, William. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Pamela Milligan, Director for the Center for Excellence in Disaster Management and Humanitarian Relief. Many of you know that we are a direct reporting unit to United States Pacific Command, established in 1994 after challenging humanitarian assistance operations in northern Iraq and Somalia, and after the absolutely remarkable military participation in Operation Sea Angel in the 1991 Bangladesh tsunami. Those operations showed basically Senator Inouye, who was our benefactor and the sponsor of the law that created us, was that the military was going to have a future role in disaster management, and in order to do it well, it needed to have a better understanding of its civilian partners. Our primary mission is a CivMil mission, to improve the CivMil relationship, to enhance disaster management. Historically, I will tell you folks that we have had a much broader mandate in conflict, in disasters, humanitarian assistance through peacekeeping operations. I will tell you today we focus primarily on natural disasters and man-made chemical biological type disasters. I went last because I will tell you we are not a response operation. We are a pre-crisis preparedness, prepared to respond operation. And we do this primarily through education and training, through engagement with our foreign partners, and by information exchange. And I will tell you that this information sharing part of what we do is probably the most important part of what we do. It starts with lessons learned. We did go to Typhoon Haiyan to the Philippines to do a lessons learned report. I will tell you that I'm a very small organization, about 25 people. I have very little capability to do anything by myself. So we have huge partners, Harvard Humanitarian Initiative, our own Pacific Disaster Center, the Columbia, IMC. Almost every day we're entering into a new MOU with a partner, because that's how we leverage our capability and leverage their capability to basically, for all the uniformed people in this room, to enhance what you do and to provide you service, and I'll talk about that in a minute. I thought just quickly I would go over a few lessons learned that we learned in Typhoon Haiyan that will be applicable to you folks. One is we found that if we actually use lessons learned and go back and review them before an operation, we actually can do what we do better. And one of the things that General Ryan mentioned is this is the very first operation that we did not have classification issues. We, for the most part, declassified all the information, went immediately to APAN and to the NIPR. And if you do not know the All Partners Network system, it is the DoD prescribed system for communicating with our partners. I know it's very difficult. I do know that our parent agency, OSD, would really like us to get behind APAN, so I'm putting out a plug for APAN. We shared the information. I will tell you, we also learned that information sharing doesn't stop by just passing the information back and forth. There was an integration problem, so now we have to make sure that people understand what we've given them, and that and that there's some effort to integrate what we're doing with their activities. Yeah. We also found that people with prior experience in HADR performed better. And this is a conundrum, basically, for the United States military, because none of the services track who participated in an HADR event. I've gone to Washington to try to advocate for this, and I will tell you that OSD did it for COIN, and it was very, very difficult. And so they're not looking forward to entering into another process where we have to identify people and track them. I will tell you that if we can track them, and I'll give you a Tomodachi example, we were looking for a Navy, I was at USPACOM at the time, we were looking for a US Navy flag officer who spoke Japanese. When we went into the DER system, it took us 45 seconds to find that information. So if we could go into DERS and say who in the theater participated in the last event so that we could use their expertise again, that would be very, very helpful. We also found the need for liaison officers across the board. General Ryan said to you that the importance of these command centers, well, the command centers have to be coordinated, and we can do that through liaison officers. And if we can get native speaking liaison officers, it's very, very helpful. I will tell you that, as you know, our foreign partners are much better at having second languages than we are in the United States. And I always tell people, think how hard it would be for you to sit through a technical meeting in a foreign language and try to get it all. If we could develop, and I know that we are trying to develop more language skills in uniform and send those people in a response, it would be very helpful. The other thing we found, and if you haven't read I'll put in the plug for the CFE Typhoon Haiyan report, it's on our website, cfe-dmha.org. It's a very eclectic report because I mentioned it was written by military, civilian sector together. It talks about, there's this little vignette there about the USS George Washington and how well they had to operate with the mayor of this town. I will tell you, I know that our Army Civil Affairs brothers are very in tune to working with local governments. I don't think we normally have that opportunity. Our disaster management reach is now from the ministry level, apparently down to the mayoral level, and we need to be prepared for that. I do believe, however, that that speaks to having more Army Civil Affairs people in response. The other thing we found out that if you have pre-existing relationships, it matters. And as the rotational force of the U.S. military doesn't allow us often to keep those relationships, the one folks we can depend on to have those existing relationships are our State Guard, our state partnership partners, and we need to use them in response. We use them in developing the skills in the theater security cooperation programs for disaster preparedness, but we rarely count on them or call on them on the response operation, and I think we need to change our processes and make sure that our SPP partners are on the JMD. And lastly, we found that we need to have specific doctrine and training in disaster management. As was mentioned earlier, our foreign partners are using their militaries in a much greater capacity than the U.S. uses its military in disaster management. A couple weeks ago, Lieutenant General Luga from the Philippines came to talk to us and said that because of the Typhoon Haiyan basically taking out all first response capability, that the Philippines is considering a first response mission for the AFP, and he wants our help. And I said, sir, I want to help you, and I'll make sure you get the right people. I'm not sure it's a DOD that will be able to provide that expertise to you. I need to bring in FEMA. I need to bring in the emergency managers who really can help the AFP government develop those skills. And that is basically the mission that we're doing. Somebody mentioned to us the coordinating authority. Last year, Admiral Locklear signed a decision memo that makes my center the coordinating authority for all disaster management in the region. It sounds bigger than it is. Basically, what I'm supposed to do is tell all of you what everybody else is doing and to make sure that we don't step on our foreign partners' toes, which we've done, our humanitarian partner toes, which we do all the time, and that we really collaborate and coordinate our activities. And to that and we are building, and it should be available within the next 90 days, a common operational picture and called DEPICT, Disaster Preparedness Collaboration Tool, and it will be housed on a system called Ushahidi. Ushahidi was developed in Kenya to monitor elections. It's a very open crowdsourcing program, and basically what we want is for all of us to put our OAA, our theater cooperation disaster management activities in the system, who, what, where, when, why. And we're going to be working with our foreign partners to do the same, our international partners, and that we all can get a visual on what we're doing in the theater so we make sure that it makes sense. We also are doing something that I think will ensure that we all work closely together, and that's kind of making sense of what US DoD does in disaster management. And we've started this 4-step process where we do deep dive kind of baseline capability analysis of our foreign partners, and then 5-year engagement plans. In those engagement plans, we've only done one thus far, really will involve all of our service components, all of our partners, international and US government partners, so that we know that what service we're providing makes sense and has an end. And then lastly, of course, we'll try to do an assessment. As you know, we're all under scrutiny by the GAO and DODIG to assess what we do and determine that if we're making a difference. I will tell you that over time, we know we make a difference. It's not necessarily attributed to what DoD has done, but you know our Australian and our Japanese partners are very big in this area in our theater. Collectively, we know because fewer and fewer times do our foreign partners need our assistance in a disaster. We respond to, I think, less than 10%. This Typhoon Haiyan was very significant because it was the first real big international response in a very long time. Even Japanese operation Tomodachi, pardon me, was mostly a bilateral response between the U.S. and Japan. So once we know what it is we're supposed to do, why we're doing it, we can help you folks, and it has been brought to our attention from the Defense Security Cooperation Agency that maybe the Center for Excellence could be helpful to you in developing assessment tools, not against our theater campaign plans, but really just assessing the engagement for our security cooperation. We have a lot of things that that can help you on our new website. We have a virtual library of all CivMil disaster management, And more importantly, we have been trying to bring all lessons learned from operations across the domain into one site so that we can try to have them readily available so we can use them. There also on that site is a trend analysis of disasters over the last 20 years and what we found. And as I mentioned, what we find is that we keep making the same mistakes over and over again. So with that and time to leave questions, I'll end there, and thank you for your consideration.
Okay, at this time we have some questions, and I think Mr. McNulty, you have one, so please go ahead.
Sure. So my question comes from Lieutenant General Guy Swan, and he asks, what is the biggest challenge for a private volunteer NGO like Team Rubicon in working around military forces, both the U.S. or host nation? I think one of the key challenges working around military forces for an NGO unlike Team Rubicon is understanding how the military operates, specifically the U.S. military. And I think that's actually our greatest strength, given the fact that we're 80% military veterans. And so we used that strength to our advantage during Typhoon Haiyan. We had key relationships with individuals within the U.S. military that we leveraged. Oftentimes, we even knew some of the loadmasters on the flight line, and those things, those relationships definitely helped us moving forward. I'll say this, as being both a Marine and now running a humanitarian organization, it's interesting having seen this from both sides. There's kind of maybe a historical distrust between humanitarian aid and the military, especially in a combat zone, having been deployed to Iraq as a civilian, not in uniform, but having been deployed to Iraq. I know that oftentimes with some of the other humanitarian organizations we were working with, there was the question of ulterior motive, and definitely there were some things like being used, ambulances being used to ferry around weapons and things like that. So there was this, having seen it from both sides now, I understand why some humanitarian organizations look upon the military with distrust and vice versa. So that's a challenge, but working with the military forces is definitely something that I think that is our greatest strength. Understanding the key stakeholders and the management of that response, now this is something that we need to do a lot better job of, and how we should plug into those key stakeholders like USAID and understanding their mission. We started off as an organization that self-deployed to the Haiti earthquake. We didn't know what the cluster was. We didn't know what any of these things were. We're learning. And so for us, that's been a big challenge that we're trying to overcome. And then, yeah, that's really all I have on that question.
All right, thank you. I think General Ryan has a question.
Yes, I'm not sure who the question's from, but it's a question I've been asked many times since coming home from the Philippines. The question is there a need for other DoD pre-position HADR assets in theater, or is the existing set enough, and is this a viable future posture initiative? I can share with you, I'm unqualified really to answer that question, but I can share with you what 3rd MEF has done in response to disasters in the Philippines. The relationship through exercises is very strong. They've pre-positioned a set of humanitarian assistance type equipment. I think it's about 75 pieces of equipment, rope use, trucks, engineer equipment, in Luzon, near Manila, with the Just Mag. And that assisted them in rapidly deploying the 3rd MEB and Paul Kennedy from Okinawa overnight with Marines to fall in on that kit and then remove it another 300 plus miles, nautical miles, to the disaster areas. So I think there's goodness in that event. They did decide to activate reconfigure the MU in a configuration that was much more humanitarian assistance focused. So lots of engineer equipment to do route clearance, and 1,000 Marines, and departed that out of Okinawa as an ARG MU, I think Task Force 76, that arrived later in the disaster response. But they had to unload the ship and repack the ship to be able to get the right configuration of equipment to be able to respond, particularly to those amphibious areas, the thousands of little islands that potentially had stranded and distressed folks on it. I think we looked at this in Alaska last week. We asked the same question in the 9.2 earthquake scenario, like 1964. What does Alaska not have that could be pre-positioned militarily to support that operation? And it's really a separation of all the bridges, rail and road bridges that would likely collapse, that would disconnect Anchorage from Fairbanks, and now divide your military response capabilities, landlocked, unable to reinforce, with the exception of air movement of those forces from north to south, where the potential disaster is, or south to north. So we're considering, do we have the Bailey or Johnston bridging capabilities pre-positioned in Alaska to be able to support the state to reestablish those ground locks? And then in the Philippines, one that we wrestled with and went back and forth a lot on is the employment of Army watercraft available in the Pacific. Incredible capability that the United States Army brings to the Pacific, and we struggle with the time distance of launching and arriving to a disaster in time to provide support. But there was an opportunity if the sale could have occurred faster to potentially open sea lines of communication between Luzon and the island of Samar, which then linked to the island of Leyte. And the Filipinos quickly solved that problem with their own ferries, but if Army watercraft is in a response area and could deploy, that would be of help in that particular scenario. But the tyranny of distance is a challenge in the Pacific, as we all know. And frankly, the number of units that were placed on PTDO, all of that, in my opinion, becomes critical capability that could be rapidly deployed, probably by air, to respond to the need. It could be rope use, it could be forward surgical teams, it could be engineer capability, depending on the task force commander's needs.
Well, thank you. And now Ms. Van Slate may have a question.
Thank you, Gerald. Okay, do HADR planning discussions include capabilities or resources of international express logistics carriers that may already have a presence or infrastructure in an area affected by disasters? Great question, but I want to step back once. During disaster response, we work on a pull system, not a push. Just because there's infrastructure that can get in doesn't mean, all right, let's load it up with bottled water because that's what we needed last time, and some sandbags, like some colleagues of mine stole once from Okinawa and pushed them into a certain country. No push, pull. But if something is identified, I would say, and I know, yes. Commercial operators, commercial logistics carriers, freight forwarders, they get the job. If they can get in, we want to spend taxpayer money to go through commercial entities first. But I will caveat this, much like my colleague from Team Rubicon said. He talked about, I don't know if they understand what that is, because we don't want to offend anybody, but there's something called a cluster system. It's a good cluster, not a bad cluster. It's started by the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. They're the lead, if requested by the host nation, to coordinate all those cats and dogs, those humanitarian, and they have what they call the cluster system. It's job, sector, task organized. There's an education cluster, water sanitation, health, and one of them is logistics. So if you, I'm assuming by this question, if you have an interest in an international express logistic carrier, you need to get hooked into the logistics cluster in that country during a disaster response, especially if you are willing to donate said movement. That will probably come up. So yes. So in a short answer, yes. Thank you.
Thank you. I have one question was asked. It is well understood that HADR operations are a moral good. Please talk about the strategic security aspects and how a lack of cooperative HADR operability affects everyone's national security and what can happen if we don't do these things. Well, when a nation has a natural disaster, it has vulnerabilities, and to include its own government and its own sovereignty. And we understand that, and besides helping our humans, our brothers and sisters around the world, we also want to make sure that we can support the nations and our neighbors. Because as you well know, if we ignore and do not participate, others will, whether they be insurgents, terrorists, or other countries with agendas counter to our own, counter to many democracies. So yes, it's inherent, and to me it's implied, it's understood that if we don't together as neighbors show up and help our other neighbors, then there's going to be a lack of faith, that we're not going to stand up for each other, and our own support could erode, and this would allow others with maybe less than good agendas take over. So there's always that natural inherency that this is for security cooperation. So yeah, it's just making sure that when the time comes, you count on me and I can count on you. Another question I received was many of the response forces needed for disaster relief, such as water purification engineers, Army watercraft, are in the reserve component, the U.S. Army Reserve component. How can we better prepare and employ reserve forces in short notice for these kinds of scenarios? Well, a lot of times it's just too fast. The tyranny of distance, the time zones, by the time a reserve unit is alerted, mobilized, and sent out, everybody's coming home. It could take 30 to 45 days, as many of you know. Onesies, twosies, of course. You know, I was gone in 72 hours, but that was just a one-person operation. One of the things, such as the California National Guard, they are extraordinary and highly skilled in body recovery, sadly because of the earthquakes and other things that they have. So there are National Guard units and Army Reserve units that, and maybe small teams could show up and arrive, but for the most part, it's going to take time. And obviously the reserves need to shout out their capabilities to the active components to let them know what they have, but the reserve forces need to understand that if called upon, it's going to be days, maybe weeks later. So that would be one big, nasty endeavor if we are still doing recovery weeks and months into it. There was one other question. I think, Pamela, do you have some more?
I
Yeah.
do have a question,
Dr. Milligan
sir.
has one.
I addressed it, but I didn't get to the gist of the question. The question is, how can the services best leverage what CFE offers to increase DoD capabilities and capacity to support HADR DMHA? And I will say, first and foremost, if you're on this island, please participate in our 5-year engagement planning process. I will tell you, we did it for Nepal last month, and I think the service components were very, very surprised at how much the other services were doing. So participating will give you some sort of situational awareness on everything that's happening with that country. Take our HEART course. Rene mentioned HEART and Jayhawk. They're both worth taking because they come at the same issue through different perspectives, so I would encourage you to do both. We've just made it very easy for you to take HEART. It's on JKO. It's 10 hours of instruction, I think 8 courses. Or it could be 10 courses for 8 hours of instruction, but it goes through humanitarian principles. It just helps get that, explains the cluster system, the things that William was talking about that we all need to know if we're going to respond. Tell us what you're doing. Once the Ushahidi COP is up, depict, please fill in your information so that we don't make mistakes, that we don't miss opportunities to collaborate and coordinate. And then, of course, ensure quality training. There has been some mention that we go and do engagements, and we don't necessarily give the best or most up-to-date information. That has mostly come to me through our CBRNE attempts. And so later this year, DITRA will come to Hawaii and provide an up-to-date CBRNE curriculum so that we can take out to our foreign partners. And then also help in the lessons learned piece. Not only is it important that we capture the lessons learned, but we need to start having discussions about how we might change our operating procedures to address these lessons. And I guess that's the last thing that was a lesson learned in Typhoon Haiyan, is that there are sometimes standard operating practices or CONOPs developed. There is a Republic of the Philippines, U.S. HADR CONOP, and so many of our responders did not know that that CONOP existed. We have made the suggestion that we will put that in the execution order next time to remind everybody that it's there, but I mean, you have to know what's available in order to respond appropriately and quickly. Regarding quickly, I'll mention, I think it's very important for those of you who are involved in exercises. I was at the ARF meeting recently, the ASEAN Regional Forum on HADR, and the Philippines came to talk about the experience in standing up the Multinational Coordination Center. And it all seemed very new to them. I mean, the fellow briefing said we had to go find the doctrine, we had to figure out what it is we wanted this coordination center to do, and he seemed like it took a while. It slowed them down looking for that doctrine. And here we know that it is a concept that we train with every year in Balakatan and our ADMM Plus exercises. The problem is that we go into these exercise camps, field exercises, and it's already stood up. I think we might need to step back a little bit and go through the decision-making process of why we're doing what we're doing on the exercise field. And then I just got another one about can we give some examples on how we step on toes? I'll give you the famous example. I apologize to Rene, she's heard it 1,000 times. Bangladesh, pandemic influenza. US DOD, funded by USAID HOFTA, goes into Bangladesh and provides a pandemic influenza. We do not coordinate the dates. We just so happens we pick a date 1 week before UN OCHA has a pandemic influenza workshop as well. Everybody came to ours. They didn't go to UN OCHA's. You can imagine UN OCHA was upset by that. There are a lot of actors in this business, folks, and it is not a normal function of DoD. Disaster management is not a core competency. Our humanitarian brothers are wondering what the heck we're doing. This is what they've been doing forever, and all of a sudden, there we are. And so I think it's important for us to know our humanitarian partners, know what they do, and I think it's getting very much easier now to coordinate and collaborate with them if we so choose, but we have to recognize that they feel like they're the experts and we are in their business. And so that's how I believe we step on toes, and how we prevent it is just situational awareness of what everybody's doing. So I really have high hopes for the COP that we're developing, and it can prevent us from making those mistakes. Thank you.
All right, great. I think, Mr. McNulty, we have something for you to respond.
Yes, how are partner companies identified during the disaster response planning, and how can companies communicate capabilities for specific locations around the Asia-Pacific region? We are a member of the Clinton Global Initiative, and a lot of our, many of our partnerships have been developed through organizations like CGI or Skull World Forum and Summit Series. And so we regularly take part in those calls prior to deploying into a disaster, where CGI gets all their partner organizations together, and it's AID and IMC and a lot of the state and NGOs take part and are members of this organization. So that's how we identify a lot, and we've developed strong partnerships with organizations like Palantir. We use Palantir Mobile for our assessments. And so I would recommend plugging into organizations like Clinton Global Initiative. What they do is they have, literally we have an account manager who looks at those companies and then matches those companies up with NGOs like Team Rubicon, and then we go forward and do good things.
All right, thank you. I think the PDC and NOAA have something.
Right, so we got a question. How are you sharing information with private groups like Team Rubicon or Habitat for Humanity, and can we do more? Chip, did you any comment on you as an official organization?
Sure. Well, just in general, I'd say I don't recall that we've had interactions with those two groups directly, but as a country, we have a program called the National Tsunami Hazard Mitigation Program that involves basically emergency management organizations from all the states that have ocean coasts, the West Coast, Gulf Coast, East Coast, and Hawaii, and also the territories, Puerto Rico, American Samoa, Guam. And through those organizations, we do a lot of outreach activities to various groups that have interest. Internationally, a lot of the outreach work for tsunamis is done through another organization of NOAA's called the International Tsunami Information Center, and they do training and provide training materials and have a huge library of tsunami information. So that's more or less, but our main mission really is the warning function.
So, and just a couple comments from the Pacific Disaster Center perspective. We have a variety of tools. Some of them are using social network like Twitter, Facebook, and so forth, which will channel the information that comes from CHIP's organization along with other kinds of data and information that people can access. And probably now, more than ever, the systems, the capacity, the capabilities that are out there to access data and information has never been greater. Of course, this depends on where you live on the planet, but there's certainly more access to data and information, to the point that many of the official organizations are a little concerned about the way in which they control this information during actual events, and what is valid information and what is information that's perhaps not as valid. So this ability to share through vetted and trusted sources is extremely key to the ability to actually use this information effectively. So, as Chip pointed out, there are organizations within NOAA, within his umbrella organization, and PDC has its own resources in this regard. But sometimes it's not the lack of information, it's the proliferation of it that can be a challenge.
Thank you. What we're going to do is General Ryan has one response, and then we'll close out with Ms. Van Slate.
Yeah, the question is, in relation to HADR, what are the mission capability gaps now and in the future that will require material solutions? And I'll answer from a military solution perspective. As General Beard whispered to me, it really is disaster specific. But I think one that's common to all that I've seen in my experience is the immediate capability to do lift in rotary wing and lift in fixed wing. So if you look at Damian, it was CH-53s, all for the battle group. It was V-22s and C-130s, self-deployed from Okinawa overnight. It was UH and CHs potentially in other disasters. It was C-130s and C-17s provided by the Air Force. And then it was contracted commercial lift to bring in the humanitarian supplies to establish it very quickly a hub-spoke capability to get to the most remotest of areas. And we saw that also in Alaska. Becomes a very air-centric distribution mission early until ground locks can be established. And that air-centric capability is something that we do bring pretty rapidly, but it's a very expensive solution. And the quicker you can get away from that solution and get to a viable ground lock or a good sea lock that can move much more supplies, quite frankly, the better.
Okay, last question, and then lunch. So how do you deal with security for relief workers? And do you, Ms. Van Slate, take care of security for all workers or only U.S. workers? Very interesting question from my most dangerous audience. So for security, it is a factor, and it is a part of every humanitarian response. But the entity that has the responsibility for the security of humanitarian workers is the host nation civilian entities, and of course their military. Right? If they say no-go area, no-go. We no-go. Now, for U.S. specific, for those of you who've worked overseas, it's the regional security officer at the U.S. Embassy that tells USAID OFTA where we can go and if we have to have special security instances for us. I've asked my boss if I can personally carry a weapon, and he told me no. So That's the last, yeah, that's like a personal thing between us, I think. So the last question I want to say, thank you very much for your patience. Thanks for listening to everyone here on the panel. And I wanted to address a short question that was mentioned in the very first briefing. Someone said, hey, what's happening now after Operation Damayan in the Philippines? We've gone out of immediate response, now we're into long-term recovery. What are we doing as a U.S. military? Great question. So, as we all know, we've experienced this in our own country. When you have a massive disaster, it's very difficult. The relief phase is very easy. I work for the easy part of this, if you can call it easy. I work for like immediate response, saving lives, shelter, water. But when you get into short-term recovery and then long-term recovery, it takes years. And it is that host nation civilian entity, they're FEMA, that is in charge. In the Philippines, they're the ones who decide where you can build, what will be the new standards for houses, building codes. Can we rebuild in these areas? These are very political and they take time. But if you'd like to know more information about U.S. AID writ large and our efforts continuing on to long-term recovery, in the audience today we have our USAID Development Advisor, Garrett Harries. Garrett, you raise your hand so everyone sees you. So if you'd like to know more about the USAID mission in Manila and what they're doing in terms of long-term, year after year assistance, you can speak with our colleague, Garrett Harries. All right, thank you very much.
Just to close out, when General Ryan and I were with the Marines in Manila working the disaster, it seemed how all the Army guys were clustered in one little group. And so General Whistler came over one day and asked General Ryan, he goes, what are you guys doing? And he goes, sir, we're an LGOP. And he goes, what is an LGOP? And he goes, sir, it's a little group of paratroopers. So anyway, from our little LGOP to the rest of the panel, thank you very much.